not sure about the pronunciation. He was also founder of the Commission on Geospatial Analysis and Modeling of International Cartographic Association, and I was one of the participants at the first workshop in Vienna in 2006, 07, I remember right. If I remember right. He also is an associate editor of a lot of journals like Computer Environmental and Urban System and other. Now, obviously, also, I can continue for a lot of time to introduce him, but probably it's more interesting to listen him than me. And being the floor is yours. The name of the presentation is Computing the Structural Beauty that exists in underlying living structure of space or big data. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. 2 days ago, I thought that I would have cancer instead, not because of the COVID, because something occurred.
Being probably if you are close to the computer, they can listen you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was Friday, just Friday, 2 days ago, and I had a problem. I thought I have to cancel this trip, and not because of the COVID, but something happened just very early morning. And when I was sleeping, I tried to switch my hand to switch off because it's also very hot in Sweden. I tried to switch off the fan, but then I feel very dizzy. It was 3 o'clock, you know. I thought, okay, I tried to not move and sleeping until 7 o'clock. It happened again, and I stand on the bed, dizzying, completely out of my control. I thought if it's a stroke, because for my age. But actually, it's just a very pleasant surprise. I see doctor afterwards. I have a low blood sugar, so that's why I have this, you know, the candy. In case I fell down, I put it here. I will be okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's begin with this 2 quarter. You can see on the screen from this book, How Nature Works, by the Danish physicist Per Bak. You don't get rich from doing physics, but you do get an opportunity to go all the places the rich would go if they had the time. This quarter implies that there is a shared notion of good place, like a Malago. You know, both the rich and the poor would love to go if they had time and the money. The second quote is also from another Danish, Søren Abba Kierkegaard, the philosopher and the father of existentialism. And he said, the life is understood backward, but must be lived forward. It simply says we can understand what happened, but we cannot predict what will happen in the future. So thank you all for coming, both online and the on-site. I would like also to say thank you to the conference organizer for having me here, and it's my great pleasure and honor to share with you my research on the livingness of space or structural beauty. So you see the title. The structural beauty or the livingness of space is a measure of the living structure that exists in any part of the space, in our surrounding, in the rooms, in the garden, in the streets, in cities, in everywhere. Just on the air, we cannot see it, but it's everywhere. So to better understand the living structure, we can simply refer to analogy. The living structure is to beauty, I really mean beauty, what temperature is to warmth. So living structure exists pervasively in any space or big data. Many people tend to think big data is unstructured, but I think it's the opposite. It is a real structure according to the underlying living structure or the underlying structure of society. So space and society is not random. They are very well structured. This is the living structure. So before my presentation, I would like to express my deep gratitude to my co-workers, in particular, these two smart students, and Mr. Huang, an exchange student from Taiwan, and Chris Derlying, a Dutch boy who worked with me in some difficult times over the past 2 years. Also, we published 3 papers with which my presentation will concentrate on. So I will begin with a very brief introduction to this remarkable person, Christopher Alexander, a pioneering architect who is better known in computer science than in his own field of architecture. Then I will proceed with the motivation of why structure beauty, or why the livingness or order, you could say. Next, I move to the statement that the beauty is not just in the eye of beholder, not just, but more importantly, exists in the space and in the underlying living structure of space. To be more precise, I will explain what is living structure or wholeness, another word, which has multiple roles. For example, in the Gestalt psychology, and even in some religion settings. But it was developed into a mathematical concept by Alexander. So based on this notion of living structure, we characterize the livingness of space or structure beauty by 2 parameters. The number of substructures, S, how many? And then their inherent hierarchy, H, how many hierarchy? To demonstrate, we computed the air score using paintings, city plans, building facades, ordinal images, and geospatial big data like nighttime imagery and location-based social media data. So finally, I will look at the next steps and discuss my vision, about these 2 notions: the life, which is beyond the biology, towards structure things, and then the self, which links our inner world and the external world. How many of you know this man? Can you raise your hand? Only see a couple of. He is a scientific maverick, and he passed away just a few months ago at the age of 85 after a decade-long serious illness. He is not only an architect, but also a scientist. Not only a theorist, but a design practitioner. He produced over dozens of books, hundreds of papers, and built over more than 200 construction projects all over the world. So it's a truly design practitioner. He is widely known for these classical works: A City is Not a Tree, A Pattern Language, Timeless Way of Building, and his magnum opus, The Nature of the Order. A pattern language is best-selling in all times. It is a source of the inspirations of object-oriented programming and the Wikipedia framework. So we can say that Alexander's technology is in your iPhone, in your pocket. The Timeless Way of Building, the book, over 500 pages, without a single reference. The mathematician Nikos Salingalas, Alexander's longtime collaborator, once commented on the book. It is an architecture book with deep philosophical meaning. And it is an architecture book. It is a philosophical book with architecture and examples, to quote. So Alexander is commonly recognized as the father of the OO programming and the father of design patterns. In his magnum opus, The Nature of Order, on which he spent 30 years on the making, and he made two bold claims to quote, all space and matter, organic or inorganic, has some degree of life in it. And the matter or space is more alive or less alive according to its structure and arrangement. All matter or space has some source of the self in it. And this self, or anyway, some aspect of the personal, is something which infuses all matter or space. Everything we know as a matter, but now think it to be mechanical, end quote. Here, the notion of the life is beyond biology towards structure, and the notion of the self is beyond daily life use. Yourself, myself, and herself, but towards some spiritual things. If, as Alexander put here, either of the two claims came to be true, that would radically change our picture of the universe. It is, I think, in this context, The Nature of the Order is subtitled as an essay on the art of the building and the nature of the universe. Now let's move on to the motivation. Why structured beauty, or why the livingness of space? Beauty is commonly conceived as a matter of the opinion or personal preferences. However, if we conduct a survey asking people about their perception, we would find out that a crushing majority of people would prefer traditional buildings to the right, for example, over the modernist one to the right. In this presentation, the notion of beauty is interchangeably used with that of the order. So there are two types of the order: organic to the left versus mechanic to the right. Note that the left structures are made of steel and concrete, but they are less mechanical, more organic. On the right-hand side, the structures are said to be more mechanic, less organic. The organic order has a high degree of beauty than the mechanical one. This traditional building to the left, namely the tower of the White Goose, is more beautiful than the X house to the right. It can trigger a good sense of the feeling, such as belonging, well-being, proud, and even healing. The X house to the right tends to generate some bad sense of the feeling, such as anxiety and fight or flight responses. So what makes the difference between these two types of buildings? One with good sense of the feeling, the other bad. Or what makes the difference between the good or bad building? This is the initial question that Alexander intends to answer. In other words, his interest lies on how to make it truly beautiful buildings. So instead of the good or bad feeling, it may be more correct to say that in most situations, both have good sense of the feeling, like this pair of carpets. But the one with a high degree of good feeling, the other with the low degree of good feeling. So this different degrees of good feeling can be detected through the so-called mirror of the self test. That is, given a pair of pictures or things put side by side, and the human subject is asked to choose one that he or she has a better sense of belonging or wholeness. So mirror of self-test differ fundamentally from the traditional perception or psychological test, which is to seek inter-subject agreement. Instead, the mirror of self-test is to obtain objective judgment about the wholeness, something objective that exists in space. Here is different ways of asking for such test. Which of the two covers, is more like your own self? Which of the two seems closer to representing you, your own self, in your totality? Which of the two is more deeply connected to your eternal self, your aspiration, the core of you that exists inside? Which of the two is or seems more alive or more live? Which of the two makes you more aware of God or make you feel closer to God? Which of the two would you prefer to become by the day of your death? Assume for a moment that you believe in reincarnation and that you were going to reborn as one of these two things. And which one would you rather be in your next life? So all in all, the mirror of self-test is to seek objective judgment about the wholeness or living structure instead of inter-subjective agreement. For example, this pair of patterns showing human activity in London using location data of tweets. The right pattern tends to have high degree of wholeness or beauty. So to this point, we may put the beauty or order into two categories. One is organic order or organic beauty, which looks like nature, while the other is mechanical order or mechanical beauty, which looks like artificial. So living structure or structured beauty, we have been advocate, belongs to the first one. In other words, a coastline is more living or more structurally beautiful than Euclidean geometric curve. So Alexander has long argued that the statement of good architecture is true or false, rather than just a matter of the opinion. Beauty exists in deep space. It is not skin deep, but far deep. Alexander devoted his entire life to one simple question: how to make truly beautiful buildings, as beautiful as these traditional ones, the Yellow Tower, the Taj Mahal, the Parthenon. Note that what Alexander pursued is not simply nostalgia, a sentimental longing for the past, but the living structure with which people have good sense of their feeling or with high degree of place attachment. So what is the living structure or wholeness? To quote from Alexander, I propose a view of physical reality which is dominated by the existence of this one particular structure, W, the wholeness. In any given of space, some subregions have high intensity as centers, others have less. Many subregions have weak intensity or none at all. The overall configuration of the nested centers, together with their relative intensity, comprise a single structure. I define the structure as the wholeness of that region. End quote. Note here, the physical reality defined here differs fundamentally from that Descartes. Under the current Cartesian reality, space is essentially lifeless or neutral. And the two traditional views of space, Newton's absolute space and the Leibniz relational space, are essentially framed under the Cartesian mechanical worldview. Alexander took an organic view and formulated the third view of space. Space is neither lifeless nor neutral, but a living structure capable of being more living or less living. In other words, space is not machine-like, but organism-like. So living structure is a physical phenomenon and mathematical structure that consists of numerous substructures with an inherent hierarchy. Across different levels of the hierarchy, there are far more small substructures than larger ones. Yet, on each level of the hierarchy, the substructures are more or less similar. The notion of the far more small and largest and the more or less similar are actually the two fundamental laws of living structure: the scaling law and the turbulence law. These two laws are complementary rather than contradictory to each other. Note that the turbulence law is also commonly recognized as the first law of geography. Everything is related to everything else, but the near things are more related than the distant things. To better understand living structure, let's look at these two papers. One with a tiny dot in the middle, and the other black or empty paper. In terms of the underlying living structure, these two papers are very different from each other. One is a living structure, the other is non-living structure. So let's examine why they are so different. The paper with a tiny dot in the middle will be able to induce or create over 20 substructures or centers. They are illustrated here. For example, the paper itself, number one, the dot, number two, is also the circle in terms of the perception, calculation around the dot. And then the paper is partitioned into two parts, left to right, or up and bottom. And then there's a cross center on this dot. And then the four corners of the paper, and then four rays, which links four corners to the dot. Importantly, these centers or substructures constitute an interconnected whole with very convoluted supporting relationship. So as an outcome of this supporting relationship, they are far more small and large. Small and large in terms of the intensity or strength of the wholeness. So it is a living structure with a steep hierarchy. On the other hand, the empty paper has only 5 centers. So they form very simple network with a very flat hierarchy. So it is non-living structure. Based on the concept of living structure, any space or any part of space has some degree of wholeness. The degree of wholeness is referred to as the livingness of space or structure beauty. The livingness of space is characterized by 2 parameters: the number of substructures S and their inherent hierarchy H. It implies that the more substructures, the more living or more structurally beautiful. The high hierarchy of the substructures, the more living or more structurally beautiful. The key to structure beauty lies on the decomposition of a structure into numerous substructures S at different level of hierarchy H. Shown here is an illustration on how this leaf frame is decomposed into substructures at different hierarchical levels, with red for the highest level, blue for the lowest level, and other colors for those between the highest and the lowest. To better understand its composition processing or computation, let's look at these two datasets. Each consists of 10 numbers. The first dataset contains 1, a half, 1/3, and 1/10. The average 0.29 partition the 10 numbers in two groups. The head for those larger than the average, there are 3 in the head, and the tail for those smaller than the average, there are 7 in the tail. This partition or division between the head and tail can continue for the head again. So for the 3 numbers in the head, the average is 0.61. So which partition this 3 number again in two groups, head and tail. So this partition processing is also called head-tail bricks, a classification scheme for data with heavy-tail distribution. Unlike the traditional k-means or nature breed, head-tail bricks is unsupervised clustering technique. How many classes it is determined by the data, and how to cut the interval is also determined by the data itself. So it is truly the bottom-up approach. The number of iterations plus 1 is the hierarchy label H, or we call the HT index. The first dataset has the hierarchy of 3, and there are 5 substructures. So the AS score is 5 times 3, 15. So it is a living structure. In contrast to the first dataset, the second dataset contains another 10 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 10. So the average is 5.5, which partitions these 10 numbers into equally parts. So it violates the head-tail bricks condition. So it has only 1 substructure, which is the structure itself. And the hierarchy is only also 1. So the AS score is 1 times 1. So it's 1. So it's a non-living structure. Here are the 2 paintings. The first is called Composition by Dutch painter Pieter Mondelier, while the second is modified from the composition. For convenience, let's call it configuration. Instead of seeing these 2 paintings as composed of 7 and 9 pieces or 9 blocks, we tend to view these 2 paintings are dynamically evolved or transformed from the empty square in a step-by-step fashion. There are 18 substructures that are defined at the 3 hierarchical levels. So the AS score is for the composition is 18 times 3, so 54. For configuration, there are 20 substructures that are defined at 4 hierarchical levels. So the AS score is 20 times 4 is 80. So clearly, the configuration is more even or more structurally beautiful than the composition. Now let's look at these 2 city plans. The first is for the city of London, and the other is for the Manhattan. Clearly, there are 6 hierarchical levels with over 400 substructures for the city of London, while for Manhattan, there are only 3 hierarchical levels with about 200 substructures. at 3 hierarchical levels. So in comparison, these two city plan, the air score is 4 times different. Here is 2 building facade. The traditional one to the left, the modernist one to the right. The air score for the traditional one is over 3,000, while for the modernist one has only 2,000. So by the way, these 2 buildings are actually designed scenario proposed in Stockholm neighborhood, Kungsholmen, which triggered the public debate about what kind of the urban environment we should build in the future. For these 2 urban things, the traditional building and the modernist boxes, the air score difference is more than 4 times. Clearly, the left thing is full of substructures at 5 hierarchical levels, while the right thing has very few substructures with only 4 hierarchical levels. Now let's move on to big data and how it can be used to compute the livingness of space. Before that, we needed to introduce briefly the notion of nature cities. Given a bunch of the points, we built up a triangulated irregular network team. With the team, there are far more small triangles than large ones, or there are far more short lines than long ones. So all the small triangles or short lines smaller than average constitute the nature cities, the red patches. The small triangles are also considered to be high density ones. Using geolocation of trees, entire world trees location, we slice location into different time slots in an accumulated manner. Here we see clearly how the livingness of nature cities increases as time goes. Why? Simply because the increase of number of substructures and also the hierarchy. Note that the evolution of nature cities is very much like that of the snowflake, which was invented by Swedish mathematician Van Gogh. Based on this work, we redefine fractal as a set or pattern in which there are far more small than larger ones, or the notion of the far more small than larger ones recurs multiple times. So this is also called the third definition of fractal. In the same way, we can derive nature cities from nighttime imagery. Again, rely on the average pixel value for the healthcare bricks processing. We see again here the livingness of space increases as time goes. Recently, we have developed a new representation, an organic representation of space. The new representation enables us to compare the traditional cities or traditional city plan to the modernist ones. We developed empirical evidence for the conclusion that the traditional cities are more living than the modernist ones. Note here, the modernist urban area here, you see, they are twice and 4 times as big as Venice. But their air score is far smaller than that of Venice. Not only the livingness of space for the entire area, but also for subspaces or substructures. Here, dots indicate the degree of order or the degree of the structure beauty. This slide showed hierarchical levels for the 3 urban areas. Clearly, the livingness is with highest hierarchy of 6, while the other 2 have only 4 and 5 hierarchical levels. So in summary, this case study are based on the organic representation rather than conventional mechanical representation like a raster and a vector. The slides illustrate the organic representation using the painting composition as a work example. Instead of 7 blocks or 7 pieces, it consists of, as we said, 18 recursively defined substructures and 3 hierarchical levels. The living structure emerges from the empty square, evolved or transformed into 4 to 6 to 7 substructures in a step-by-step fashion. Here we see the livingness of space increases also in a step-by-step fashion. The smallest ones are with highest degree of livingness. So to this point, we can easily differentiate one structure from the other in terms of the livingness or structure beauty. For the 4 pairs of geometric shapes in this slide, the left one is more living or more structurally beautiful than the right. The statement of that one structure is more living is therefore a fact rather than opinion. Opinion expression is idiosyncratic or subjective, although there may be an intersubjective agreement. For example, if a group of kids are asked whether they like McDonald's, they may all be shouting, "We all love McChicken." On the other hand, if we go to see doctor or doctors and ask whether we have to diagnose if you have certain disease, the doctor's advice is not just opinion, but the fact based on the meticulous investigation and measurement. So to conclude this presentation, I have few points discussed in the following slides. The first is about the order, or life, or beauty, or livingness of space, which are all interchangeably used in this presentation. The quantum physicist David Bohm, since 1970s, had a long called for new mathematics of order and structure. To quote, "What is needed is to develop a new mathematics of order and structure. This requires an extensive study in which one slowly and carefully feels one's way into subject. It cannot probably be done solely by applying existing mathematics because the latter does not have the right general structure." End quote. Over the past decades, since 70s, scientists have developed 2 closely related mathematics for characterizing the kind of the order. One is the flat geometry by French mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot. The other is living geometry by Christopher Alexander. The living geometry aims for creating beautiful buildings, yet the flat geometry aims for understanding or explaining complex or nature phenomena. In his magnum opus, Alexander made a bold claim that the order in nature is essentially the same as that in what we make or build. To quote what he said, "The activity we call building creates the physical order of the world constantly, unendingly, day after day, our world is dominated by the order we create. End quote. These two geometries have many things in common, yet they differ also fundamentally from each other. For example, the reflected geometry is under the Cartesian mechanical worldview, while living geometry or the nature of order is very much under the organic worldview. Back to the 17th century, the French mathematician philosopher Rene Descartes conceived the mental model of the world, that is, the space or the external world is machine-like. And he probably never thought it has nearly become the only mental model of the world. Under the mechanical worldview, Newton and Leibniz formulated two different views of space, absolute space and the relational one. This mechanical worldview is great. What we have achieved over the past 100 years in science and technology is mainly due to this worldview. However, this mechanical worldview is limited, since we human beings are not a part of the worldview, or we human beings are separated from this worldview. So under this worldview, we are unable to make beautiful buildings. In the nature of the order, Alexander was very much inspired by British philosopher Alfred Whitehead, who believed that space is organism-like rather than machine-like. He conceived the organic worldview in which we human beings are not separate from, but a part of the world. Alexander made a step forward and formulated the third view of space. Space is neither lifeless nor neutral, but the living structure capable of being more living and less living. It is important to note that neither the third view of space nor the organic worldview is a replacement of the older ones, but a logical extension from the older ones. In other words, we are not abandoning the two conventional view of space, nor the mechanical worldview, but to extend them towards the organic view of space and the organic worldview. Research has long discovered that view through a window may influence recovery from surgery. It implies that space has a nurturing, nourishment, and even healing effect. By space, we meant space with a high degree of livingness, like the traditional buildings. On the other hand, non-living structure or modernist buildings tend to create anxiety and fight or flight responses. Space has a healing effect, and this can also be seen from the anecdote, so-called Chernobyl paradox. Some women who were exposed to the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster seem to enjoy the better health than those who evacuated and relocated to industrial modernist spaces. The point here is not that nuclear leaking is unharmful, but the living structure seems to mitigate the radiation damage. Now we want to know why. Why the livingness of space has such a healing effect. Environmental psychology has already shown this effect in the literature, or the livingness of space correlates to the good sense of the feeling, such as belonging, proud, emotional well-being, and healing. But why there is such correlation? In other words, what is the inner meaning of the living structure? Or what is the meaning of the living structure in our inner world, in our mind and heart? It makes sense through the self or the I hypothesis. The I hypothesis states that there is physically in the universe, underlying all space and matter, at every point of space and matter, a single underlying substance that shall be called the I. It can be called and expressed in different ways, such as the concept of I, the universal I, the luminous ground, the blazing one, the I substance, the I, the self, the heaven, the spirit, and even the soul. The I hypothesis implies that an organic worldview under which human inner world is tightly united to the physical world through the I. The density of the I is not uniformly penetrated in space and matter. It depends on the degree of wholeness or degree of living structure. In other words, the more living a center or substructure, the greater possibility that the center or substructures reveals I. This is no wonder that the I hypothesis may be interpreted as consciousness emerged from the human brain, which has the highest degree of the livingness among all organs. I know that the self or the I hypothesis very difficult to understand under the mechanic worldview, but let's conduct a short experiment. Whenever you are, for example, in this room, the room is substructure of the whole buildings. A building is substructure of the street. A street is substructure of the city neighborhood. And the neighborhood is substructure of the entire city, and so on and so forth, towards the entire universe, the wholeness. We could also conduct this sort of experiment from our body, scaling down to organs. There are far more small organs than larger ones. There are far more less intelligent organs than intelligent ones. The brain being the most intelligent one. From the organs down to the tissues, to the cells, to the molecules, to the atoms, and so on and so forth. In this classic book, What is Life? That triggered development of molecular biology. The author, Erwin Schrödinger, who is a Nobel laureate, had asked a very famous question: why atom is so small? I think the answer to this question is that it is so small from which larger scales, such as the molecule, the cells, the tissues, the organs, can be built. It is the underlying living structure that matters for life. It is also the living structure that makes the body or mind a living structure with the highest degree of livingness. The mind is arguably the most complex organ that generates the consciousness. Do animals have consciousness? In 2012, the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness crystallized a scientific consensus that human beings are not the only conscious beings, and the non-human animals, including all mammals and birds and many other creatures, including octopus, possess neurological substrate complex enough to support consciousness. In the future, we aim to develop neuroscientific evidence about the human perception of structurability and further examine the correlation between the livingness of space and the brain activity using human survey and biometric data, such as eye tracking, EEG, and fMRI. In your presentation, thank you for your attention.
Yeah. Thank you for your very thought-provoking lecture. Actually, you mentioned that Alexander stated that men create order, humans when they build. So, and we know that when we design something, the quality of design may change. Maybe more, maybe, as you say, higher order or higher structure or poorer structure.
Yeah.
So we can say that we have a smart designer or a poor designer.
Yeah.
But also nature create order.
Yeah.
So can we say that we have a smart nature or a smart landscape?
Yeah.
And the poor.
Yeah. You know, the statement that he put in the, we could say the single major statement of the book Nature of Order, on which he spent 30 years on the making, is the order in nature is same as what we make human being. So we're trying to mimic nature to be. So design is not just the once create. So he refused to use creation. He used generation, which means bit by bit, step by step. So it's more the processing than the form itself. So of course, the mainstream tend to put the two kinds of order, the nature and the artificial. While his radical view is it's only one order, or the order in nature is same as what we make in the view. So this is, I think, most controversial and also very much radical thinking. But I, of course, in line with his thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Gulmira?
Thank you for your presentation. It's understood the Venice is more beautiful city than others. Because
Raise your voice. Raise your voice.
because Venice has more difficult structure than other cities. And the question, how we can estimate that the structure is beautiful or not? Do you have some estimation model of the structure is beautiful?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, according to this definition, the air score equal to S multiply H. Okay, air equal to S multiply H. The S indicated how many substructures within. So more substructure, more beautiful. Then, of course, this substructure cannot be in the same level. If all substructure in the same level, with a low hierarchy, there's only one hierarchy. So you have to create a substructure at different hierarchy levels. So this one of the slides I show that Venice, actually not the Venice, only the center of the Venice. We take only one small center part and compare to the other two counterparts of modernist ones. But these two modernist ones are twice and 4 times larger and larger than the center Venice. But they have too few substructure first, and second, the hierarchy is also lower compared to the Venice. So in terms of underlying structure, this is how we measure this livingness. Of course, we have to recognize, we have to acknowledge that there are other facts from culture, from gender, from races. People have certain. But the key message is the structure play more important role, play a major role. Let's say 70%, or at least 60%, while the cultural human aspect play the minor part. So that's why we aim for in the future using AI and deep learning to integrate this human aspect of fact into this kind of the modeling of the beauty or living.
Thank you for
Well, I'd like to elaborate a bit more about this distinction between what was mentioned here before between nature and culture. There is a treatise of Manuel de Landa, which perhaps you are familiar with, for his theory of assemblages, where he sort of names it, and he says that this is human culture, which basically is different because there are various, let's say, ethnicities, various human groups, we organize in different ways. But at the same time, it's also quite different from what is organic. And we shouldn't actually sort of pretend that what has been created by nature can be directly transplanted to human culture. Other ways that organization is ruled by different, say, rules and well, there is more specificity in this order issue. If you look, for instance, at Louis Strauss or all the other anthropologists who are trying to belong to the, let's say, field of structuralism, you would, I'm sure, well, to the classics where I'm saying, but each ethnicity, each culture has got its own rules, and we shouldn't be so easily, like, I want to put sort of emphasis that we shouldn't think that, well, there is one global, let's say, set of rules, but also there is a lot of very specificity.
Yes. If I understand your question correctly, there are two parts. The first is the nature order and culture structure order. The second is whether it is a universal structure. I think for the first part, I think actually culture and structure is not contradictory. You know, or spatial and social is not contradictory. You know, to remind you this Helios book, Sociological Space. You know, I love this book title because basically spatial and social, they are really integrated each other. For the convenience, we tend to separate these two facts, but they are very much tied to each other. So this is in other words, space reflects culture, and the culture also embedded in the space. You know, so this is the first part. The second part, I think, when we say living structure, we are not advocating one single structure. We are advocating all kinds of, you know, even though I use a traditional building as an example, but actually there are many modern buildings that have this structure, you know, very complex structure. This is the first point. And second, also, whatever structure we're talking about has to adapt to the culture. For example, if we build a house in South Asia, we use a bamboo, use wood. We build in a mountain area, we use a stone, we use So this adaptation. So I think to some extent, Alexander is very anti-globalization. You know, not just steel, concrete, and glass. This is a damage even damage to sustainability. I mean, using local material, adapt to the local weather, economic condition, and this is probably the better sustainable way for our survival. I hope I answered your question. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to ask your question that the nature on the one hand, the building environment, and the other, right? So I think this, you know, I began with Alexander. I said that he's eccentric, very much maverick, and he actually his entire life is fighting for, you know, with the mainstream, and he's not. And I said he's not. He's well known. When actually he did the PhD from Harvard when he was like 28, he did famous. But then he cannot get along with his peers, academia, who very much brainwashing by modernists. In particular, like Harvard GSD, Graduate School of the Life, you know, they are promoting this sky building and skyscraper and you know, the production line, the moderate thinking. So he thinking is very. So that's why I think he's not so well known in his because of his. So back to. So that's why I think that the mainstream, to answer your question, is that the mainstream trying to separate these two kind of order, the building environment and the nation. Why Alexander tends to say, no, there's only one. So and of course, we cannot probably at the beginning make it very beautiful, but he particularly against this kind of philosophy, the demolish and replace. He promotes some, you know, the healing. So space can be also healed. So bit by bit, not just if something is not really not good, the conventional way is demolishing and replace the new one. But the Alexander philosophy is let's build it, okay? Let's repair it and make it, and then you know bit by bit. So maybe at the beginning the built environment is not so beautiful, not so close to the net, coherent to the nature environment, but yes, yeah, learning by doing, yes, you're precise, yeah. This is what his philosophy, I think. Yeah, so he not focus on okay, form is one aspect, the shape, and we measure here, but he probably more importantly for him is to the process, the way of doing, you know, just try and error, and then you learn things, and then getting better and better. Yeah. Thank you.
For your answer. Thank you for your lecture and other philosophy. Talking about the learning and the learning by doing philosophy, so applying to these days, also thanks to the technology advancement. Do you think that using big data to structure the dynamic problems of seeing the structure to insert for
Can you move it? I can see other. I can hear almost.
You mentioned the learning by doing philosophy, so the agriculture philosophy of what the sequence of time. Do you think the introduction of technological advancements with the artificial intelligence is something that would happen in such a way, or?
Yes, definitely. The new technology, you know, many people tend to think Alexander is just traditionalist or nostalgic. Yeah, But actually, when he was a PhD student at Harvard, he started computing. He collaboration with the cognitive science and the transport engineering. So to incorporate the computing, the new technology, and we put this Wikipedia or programming all was inspired by him. So I think we based on his image structure, and we can really produce some truly design tools, not a CAD or CAM. The CAD is not the CAD is the computer-aided drawing, not design, not really design, it's just a drawing. So if we could create some software based on this image structure, then we really be able to fulfill the automatic design. And importantly, the goodness of design is not opinion. We can measure it. So through the iteration, recursive processing by some computer algorithm, and then we can make it better. So this is probably the new technology can help definitely in this study. Thank you.
Questions? No more questions? Okay. In order to extend your research, you can calculate the structural beauty of Malaga because you have a lot of volume, and you can calculate the structure of the building. You can produce another book with the research on this.
Yes,
this for
I add air score for each image or each picture. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh,
yeah,
thank you for your.
Thank you. Conversation with you.
Yes, because also some question I can ask you in the lunch or in the next day. Now we have lunch, and the session will start at 3 o'clock. Yes.